It's good to be here. It's good to be any place right now for me. My mother, bless her soul, had very difficult times in having children. 2 times before I was born, she had miscarriage. Then, 1886, I was born along with my twin brother, Jose. Sad to say, Jose only lived 1.5 years because he comes down with bronchial infection and he dies. My mother was so devastated that she went to the gravesite to keep a vigil for 1 whole month. Papa was so concerned that he rented from the groundskeeper a room for them to stay in. I was born in the city of Guanajuato in Mexico. Guanajuato, very famous as a mining town. In the 1800s, it mined 1/3 of all the silver mined in the whole world. Many other things were mined there as well. But silver was what made Guanajuato famous. It's northwest of Mexico City, right in the beginning of the Sierra Madre Mountains. The people that lived there when I was living there were of 2 kinds. Those with a great deal of money and those with no money at all. A small middle class, very small. I suppose you could say that Papa and Mama were middle class. Papa was an employee of the government. He was a teacher first. Please come in, niños. He was a teacher and he was also a writer for a local newspaper. The problem with the newspaper writing was his politics. He was too liberal for the government. The government at this time was being run by a terrible dictator, Diaz. Porfirio Diaz ruled in Mexico with an iron fist, very conservative. The people behind him were the military, the church, and the wealthy landowners. So the opportunity to reform that Juarez was trying to do before Diaz did not have a chance. And he kept having these phony elections. He would hold an election and then somehow he'd always win in a landslide when nobody voted for him. Diaz, terrible man. I don't want to get too much into politics tonight, but we will talk about this a little bit later when it's necessary. The first 6 years of my life were spent in Guanajuato, and then Mama decides we're going to move. Papa had lost his job as a writer because the liberal press was not going to do so well, and she knew that his investments in a local mine were running out. The mine was not doing well. So my younger sister, who was born into the family, Marie, Mama and Papa and I, we all moved to Mexico City. We lived in a very poor part of Mexico City. And I was to begin school. That was like trying to mix oil and water together. The teachers kept saying, Diego, sit down. And I said, what for? I want to move. So, with all of this trouble, I was a good student. Papa taught me to read when I was 4. I did not know how to learn all over again. But, so there you are. Me and school did not go along very well. My grades were very poor. But one thing I did better than all the others was to draw and paint. I can never remember not drawing and painting. We have some young people in the audience tonight. Can we get a show of hands, just the young people? How many of you like to draw and paint, young people? Oh, yeah, see, all the hands go up. Now, if I ask the parents or the adults, how many of you draw and paint? Well, I count 3, 4. Yeah. Well, it's not good to say, but what happens is, the trouble is, too many people grow up. And they forget how to draw and paint. I never forget. In fact, Papa does not like where I am drawing and painting. I'm drawing and painting on the walls in the house. He has to build for me a special studio. And I am able to draw and paint on the wall, on the floor, on the ceiling, wherever I can reach. And I do. He encourages me to draw and paint. By the time I am 10, both my parents realize school is hopeless for me. But drawing and painting is going to be my street that I must travel. So Mama takes me by the hand one day to the most famous art school in all of Mexico, in Mexico City, the San Carlos Academy of Art. Now, it was very conservative as art schools went. The tradition there was European. The professors had you drawing from plaster casts. You didn't get to see a model until you were practically ready to graduate. I was 10. All the other students were 18, 19, 20, or even older. But I was big for my age. So Mama takes me by the hand and looks up to me at the age of 10, goes to the headmaster and says, I want to enroll my son in the academy. He said, Senora, it's impossible. He's too young. Says, he will learn as quickly as the others. Let me show you his portfolio. So she brings out some of my drawings. So he says, they're very promising, especially for a young person. But he will be in with the older adults. He says, let him try. He says, all right, let's do this. We will let him come to the night school only. The people are a little bit older, and they won't pick on him so much, being that he's so young. So at the age of 10, I began taking art classes at the academy. But I had to stand in the back because the others would push me back out of the way. But I continued to work hard, and my work was every bit as good as theirs. Every bit. On the way to school, I would stop by a small store located in the Zocalo, right in the very heart of Mexico City. This shop was run by an engraver by the name of Jose Posada. Jose Posada was a great engraver, a cartoonist, a political cartoonist. What others did not dare write about, he drew. And he ran off hundreds of copies on a bright colored tissue paper to be sold for a penny or two. So the masses would have something to see about their condition. So anything dealing with fiestas on the happy side or problems on the negative side, he would engrave. And I would stop there each day and watch him working as he took the graving tool and scratched his lines into the plate. I even took some of the shavings, the copper, and put them in my pocket for good luck. I also carried other things around in my pocket that the other students didn't appreciate, such as worms, pins, and thread, because I like to go fishing once in a while. And there was a canal right near the school, and at lunchtime, to occupy myself, I would go fishing. When I was 15, I had enrolled as a full-time day student at the academy. I went to this school for 6 years. There was no graduation. You just continued to take classes. And that's what I chose to do. By the time I was 20, I needed to move on. And I decided, where am I going to go? What am I going to learn? Who is going to teach me? I need to learn so much. And my teachers all told me, you must go to Europe. That is where you must learn. And they said, I cannot afford to go to Europe. And they said, maybe you can get a scholarship or some kind of stipend. My father was working for the government and traveled all over the countryside, and he made friends with the governor of the state of Veracruz. His name was Dehesa. And Dehesa saw my work. He says he's a very promising young man. And my father told him my situation. He needs to go to Europe. So Dehesa said, we will send him on a scholarship from this state, even though you don't reside here. And it was up to me to find how to make money to book passage. And the money that I would earn or get from this scholarship was very small. I want to begin to show you now some of my work. So, if you don't mind, if we can have the lights turned out. The first slide that I'm showing you is a photograph. Is what is known as a pulperia in Mexico. It's where the drink pulque is served, mostly to working men because it's a very inexpensive liquor that's made from cactus. Women are not allowed to go in, nor of course children, only the men. And on these pulperias, you often find paintings done not by professionals, but by people who love painting. And I found inspiration in these paintings done by these people. There's a big tradition in Mexico for painting on walls. These are some sketches from my sketchbook when I was a young boy. I liked to draw cartoons and caricatures of various people that I saw. And I would also make various comments about them. I was interested in working in line. One of my teachers studied with a student of the great Angler from Paris, France. By the time I was about 19, this is the kind of painting I was doing. This shows the eruption of a volcano. But notice it's not done naturalistically. I've left a lot of details out of this painting, and I shows in colors for their heat and warmth, which of course would happen in an eruption. So it's a stylization. I realized that painting is not about trying to be a photographer. It's about interpreting what you see or what you feel and learning to simplify this. Such as this landscape, which was painted about the same time. Notice how everything is very angular. I chose to do it this way to give it a sense of geometry, which I love. I was concerned with the compositional balance in this as well. At the age of 21, I had been able to sell about 2 dozen of my paintings, which were enough to book passage to Spain, which is where I went first. So I spent the first 2 years in Europe living and working in Spain. The problem was that they were very conservative. Most of them were painting in a very old-fashioned way. And I knew that this was not going to be the way for the future for me. Although I did spend many hours studying the old masters in the Prado, people like El Greco, Zurbarán, all of these, Velázquez, all these great Spanish masters have great things to teach all of us at any time. After 2 years, a young Spanish artist by the name of Gutierrez, Maria Gutierrez, whom I had met in Spain, convinced me it would be a good idea to travel to Paris, France. Paris, she said, is where everything is beginning to happen. This was about the year 1912. And I felt this was an appropriate time to go. So we went to Paris. I spoke no French at that time, no English to speak of, only terrible Spanish. You can see in this portrait I did of a mathematician the influence of El Greco. I have purposely elongated his figure to make him more statuesque, to give him a more commanding appearance. Even though he is sitting down, it's almost as if he's ready to rise out of his chair. Notice the mathematical drawings on the ground behind him. After being in Paris for several years, I became influenced under the spell of the great Picasso. Picasso, by this time, and many of his followers, had invented the style of painting known as Cubism. I don't want to go into a long discourse explaining what Cubism is, other than to say it's a way of abstracting life into geometric shapes and forms. So, when I painted this portrait of my girlfriend, Angelina, whom I had met in Paris, I decided to do it in a cubistic manner. I did over 50 paintings using this style of painting. By the time 1918 and 1919 had rolled around, people were beginning to criticize me for being merely a follower rather than a leader, because all I was doing, they said, was rehashing what Picasso had done before me in a much better way. In the year 1920, Mexico had undergone numerous revolutions beginning in 1910. Diaz had been overthrown, and one leader after another tried to take control of Mexico. The first was Madero. Madero was supposedly the winner of the election against Diaz, and Diaz stuffed the ballot box as usual. And the people were so outraged because they knew that Madero had won that the revolution began. It was a war, and great natural leaders such as Pancho Villa, such as Emiliano Zapata and Orozco and others began to form an army of men who fought against Diaz and his troops. Eventually, Madero was able to win this battle, and Diaz fled, went overseas in exile to France to spend the last of his days there. The reason I am bringing this up is because I missed this. I was out of the country, but I certainly knew what had been going on. By the time I returned to Mexico, the revolution was continuing. There had been 8 different presidents between 1910 and 1920. And Obregon was the current president when I returned to Mexico. And at this time, I was given the task by the man who became the Minister of Education, whose name was Jose Vasconcelos. Vasconcelos said he wanted to educate people who could not read. Although he wanted them to learn to read, he said while they're learning, they must look at pictures. And he said the great Renaissance taught us that. So I was encouraged to go to Italy first before coming home to Mexico. So I traveled throughout Italy looking at the great wall paintings, the great mural paintings, the great fresco paintings of Italy. Great painters like Giotto excited me. And I said, why can we not do this on our walls in Mexico? So I spent the better part of 6 months traveling, making notes, and studying the art of fresco painting before coming home. This is a part of a fresco painting that I did initially of the great Benito Juarez, who was the great leader of Mexico, who threw the French out. And of course, he died and Diaz took over from him. But he was a great, great leader. Was interested in land reform especially. This is a section of a mural that I did showing the conquistadors mingling with the native peoples when they came over. Many of my murals are history lessons. They show people how it might have been. Now I should tell you what fresco painting is all about. Fresco means in Italian fresh, and what I did was to paint into wet plaster. Now this is not something you can do by yourself. I needed practically an army of people to assist. I usually had about 8 or 12 people who would work with me. I did all the drawing and the preliminary sketches and the actual painting. But all the laying on of the layers of plaster and the erecting of the scaffold, the cleaning of the brushes, and the mixing of the plaster, all had to be done by my assistants. I had some assistants who could also fill in areas with the paint. So they did some painting with me. Now, a fresco painting, because you paint in wet plaster with really a tempera paint, which is a water-based paint, it absorbs into the plaster and becomes a part of the wall itself. So it's very durable. It will last for centuries, as long as the wall is not damp from the reverse side. So I had to be very careful on which walls I would work on. You know, to a mural painter, it's not easy because most painters can just grab a canvas and do a painting on it, but to a mural painter, you need to have a wall surface someplace and where people will let you paint. And many of my paintings were done on government buildings because Vasconcelos commissioned me. Now, there were other painters besides me who did mural paintings at this time, who also became famous, and we often fought like cats and dogs because of arguments over politics, or arguments over women, or arguments over how one should paint. But the great Jose Clemente Orozco, who came from Guadalajara, was one of my dear friends, along with Alfredo Sequeiros. Now, Orozco tells me a story that I'd like to share with you because it tells you how difficult it can be for a painter to have a wall. In the 1930s, we had all become very famous, especially in this country. And people from Norte Americana, people from this country, from America, wanted us to come north and do paintings. Well, Orozco was given a telegram by the student body of Claremont College down in Southern California, in Pomona. They wanted him to do a painting on one of the walls in a dining hall. And he sent a two-word reply in telegram, "How much?" And the students did not have much money, of course, and they sent another telegram apologizing to him and told him they only had a couple of $1,000 to pay him, which in those days was a lot of money, but that's all they could afford, would he consider, for that amount. And he responded, no, not how much money, how big is your wall, I mean. That's all that concerned him, you see, was the size of the wall. And this painting, you can see if you visit this college today, he did a beautiful painting of Prometheus rising. This is a section of a wall showing the ancient Indians of our country and how they worked and how they became great craftspeople. The difficulty in doing a mural painting is you want to create a sense of likeness without destroying the character or the architecture of the wall. Because if you have too much deep space, the wall looks like it's crumbling before your eyes. So you want it to be flat and have form and depth at the same time. And that's always the difficulty when doing a mural painting. This is a section of a mural to be found in the National Palace in downtown Mexico City, right near the Zocalo. It took me over 7 years to complete a number of wall panels at this facility. This is a section of the painting I did in Cuernavaca, which is near Mexico City. This shows the Indian trying to find the Spanish conquistador who is dressed in armor on a horse. Guess who wins? Huh? No battle. Even though the Indian thinks he might frighten him with his costume, it does not work. But at least he was gallant. This is a photograph in black and white, obviously, which shows you the stairwell of the National Palace in Mexico City. This stairwell took me 4 years to complete. And in itself, this looks up the stairwell. When you're doing a mural painting, you do not do it all at once. You must do it like a jigsaw puzzle, one section at a time, because if the plaster dries on you, the paint will not adhere to the surface. So you can only put on as much plaster as you can paint in one day, which is about 8 hours. So I had to map it out in advance as to which sections I was going to paint on which day. This is the same section in color. Another section in color. This is a close-up, so you can see some of the brush marks on the wall of the surface that I have painted. It's a painting of a painter painting, one of the Indians who was using a brush and colors to paint with. Unloading the ship. Besides doing mural paintings, I also painted sometimes in canvas, and I like to show a lot of the peasants selling things like flowers or grain. As you see here, this woman is selling grain, and she has. One of the things that my paintings are noted for is their simplicity of composition, but I wanted to give them a monumentality, a sense of structure and form. So all of my work looks very sculptural, like it's been carved. In the year 1923, I had married a beautiful woman from Guadalajara. Her name was Lupe Marin. We had two beautiful daughters, Ruth and Lupe. And they both grew into lovely women. I wish to say tonight, I wish I could say that we lived happily ever after. But we were both fiery, and we had a very tumultuous relationship, and tragically, well, I don't know if it's tragic or not, it's meant to be, we could not live together, and we eventually divorced. Here's another painting that I did showing a woman holding a bunch of flowers. Notice how I have simplified the shapes. You don't have to show everything. Leave something to the imagination. Otherwise, the viewer doesn't get involved. In the year 1929, I had met a woman at a party of a friend of ours. Her name was Frida Kahlo. I actually thought I had met Frida a number of years earlier when she was just a teenage girl going to the same school where I had done some murals. Frida Kahlo was a very short woman, about 5'3", and I don't think she weighed more than 100 pounds. At that time, I weighed about 300 pounds and was 6 foot tall. We were a match made in heaven. What can you say? Anyway, Frida and I saw eye to eye, if not physically, emotionally and mentally on many things. She was also a painter. In fact, a fabulous painter, although she was still learning when I met her. Frida had some physical disabilities that were horrible. When she was a young teenage girl, she was out riding in a bus in Mexico City, and the bus had an accident, and she was impaled by a handrail that went through her pelvis bone and also shattered a number of her ribs. Nobody thought she was going to live. And for many, many months, she had to wear a cast around her rib cage. And because she had had polio when she was a very young girl, her right leg had shriveled, so it was not easy to walk even under normal circumstances for her. Anyway, Frida and I fell in love, and in 1929 we got married. Now, I want to say to you right now, to be honest with you, our relationship was not always smooth sailing. We both had fiery tempers, fiery dispositions, and at one time we even divorced, but we remarried. So all is forgiven, huh? We decided to come north because we were invited to come to here, to the Bay Area in Northern California by a Mr. Bender, who was an insurance agent. He said, I have a commission for you, and it's going to be at the San Francisco Stock Exchange. Well, my politics at the time did not warrant this, because I was very leftward leaning, to say the least. I was a communist, even though I'd been kicked out of the Mexican Communist Party. I was a communist, but he said, that won't matter, you're a good painter. And as long as you don't put anything in there that's too political, they will love your work, because you're very well known. And so I came north to the Bay Area with Frida, and a lot of local painters at the time became very angry that this commission was going to a foreigner, especially someone with my political background. But the press liked us because we were colorful, especially when we were together. And so I completed this mural, which you can see today if you visit the Stock Exchange. It's going up the stairwell into the dining hall at the San Francisco Stock Exchange. Also, while I was here, I was commissioned to do two other works. The San Francisco Academy of Art, which is called today, on Russian Hill, I did a large painting showing a man sitting on a scaffold who is me painting a mural on the wall, which is painted. So I painted myself into the painting that way. And I show the great tradition and history of agriculture and industry in this state, in both murals. I was even commissioned to do a private work in Atherton for Mrs. Sigmund Grove in her home. And so I did a mural for her that showed the springtime and blossoms, and it was removed eventually from her wall. They took the whole wall out, and I understand it's on display at the University of California over in Berkeley. After doing these commissions, I was given my first one-man exhibit in New York City at the Museum of Modern Art. It was a smash success, and following this, Henry Ford and his son Edsel invited me to Detroit, where I did another commission of some murals on the wall at the Detroit Art Institute, showing the making of automobiles and the industry in Detroit. Now you might wonder, what is this about communists doing hobnobbing with all these capitalists? It's a good question. They have the money. And that was my answer. That's one of the reasons the the party did not want me back in because I was mixing with these people too much. After I completed the murals in Detroit, I was commissioned again to go back to New York City to paint some murals in Rockefeller Center, which was opening up. And Abby Rockefeller, the wife of Nelson Rockefeller, was the person who contacted me. Initially, they liked the work that I had planned for the wall, but after I had halfway completed this mural, I got a telegram from Rockefeller saying, "We do not approve of you putting a portrait of Lenin in this mural of yours." And I said, "He is a great man of history. I'll put Abraham Lincoln on the other side to balance it out." And they said, "No, we cannot accept that. You must paint him out." Well, this went back and forth for a number of weeks. And the press got a hold of the story, of course. And there were people outside in the streets protesting. And finally, armed guards surrounded the mural and would not let me go to work on it anymore. In fact, they put a canvas over it so people could not see Lenin, as if they were going to melt or something. Well, they gave me a check and said goodbye to me. So I went back to Mexico with Freda. What I decided to do was a reproduction of the same painting in Mexico, which you can see today if you visit the Palace of Fine Arts in Mexico City. You can see the same painting that I had intended for Rockefeller Center. It was, of course, taken off the wall entirely. The wall was jackhammered. So there is no more mural there by me. This is another painting. I show a woman working in the grapevines. When I came back to Mexico, I went on a sort of a dry spell in the 1930s. I had been doing a lot of painting, but now I felt like I was a failure because of the problems I had had in New York City. So I did mostly portraits of people and paintings of people harvesting and people carrying flowers, and they were money makers for me. But I thought they were good paintings. I don't know how many calla lilies I must have painted during this time. But I was given another commission for another wall in a hotel Reforma in Mexico City, which no longer exists. And the mural that they wanted was to be 30 feet long and 16 feet high. And what it is, I wanted to show the joy of being in the Alameda Park on a Sunday afternoon. So this is one middle section of this entire mural, only the center section. And I have showed the Day of the Dead characters in the back, the skeletal figures. We in Mexico believe that the dead are still with us and must be treated as though they are. I've even painted myself. You see the man in the sombrero in the very center. That is a self-portrait, enjoying the crowd. I was also given a theater marquee to paint, an area above the marquee, and I said, I don't want to do any more painting on theaters. And they said, okay, how about you doing the design, and we'll have our masons who work in tessera, in tile, doing mosaic. So this is done in mosaic tile with my design. You cannot see it in this section, but it included the great Mexican clown Cantinflas as a part of this design. Even though Lupe, Marin, and I had divorced many, many years before, we still became good friends. In fact, she and Freda would cook together, if you can believe that. They became very good friends, And maybe it was because I was no longer married to her. Huh? Anyway, I did this portrait of Lupe much later in life. But I showed her strength of character and her beauty, I think, very much in this painting of her. Strong diagonal line in the work. This is a painting from a part of another painting. I wish I could show you the entire mural. And it's showing the peasant sitting down on a warm afternoon. Here is the very center of the painting of the Alameda Park, and I painted myself in the middle as a young boy. This is a black and white version. I wish I had a color version to show you. Behind me, I have painted Frida standing over me like a mother, and to my left is the skeletal woman, and to her left is my great mentor, Jose Posada, who used to do the engravings when I was a little boy. This is one of my last paintings that I did. If you can see me standing down in the middle of the painting, you see it's actually a place to hold water. In the park, they wanted to have this container for the water to hold, and so I had to use a special kind of paint that was made of latex and rubber, and it was more of an experiment to see if it would hold with always being under the water, and it seemed to do fine. This is a portrait of the famous actress from Mexico, Dolores del Rio. She was a very good friend of mine. I have made her eyes much bigger than they really were, but when I looked at her, these are how big I felt they should have been, because that's how I saw her. Dolores del Rio, a very good friend. I also was a very good friend with the American actress Paulette Goddard. We have the lights, please. Before you leave today, I hope you get an opportunity to look closely at some of the reproductions that you see on the wall. The three paintings on the right side are by my wife, Frida. She did the double portrait of me standing next to her. The painting, she did a lot of still portraits. The painting of herself with the monkeys, she had a zoo surrounding her where she lived in her blue house. Coyoacan, and the other painting to the right with the birds. The other three are paintings of mine. Two of these paintings you can see in person in San Francisco at the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco. The woman holding the calla lilies and the man holding the basket of flowers on his back. The reproduction of the small painting there is Zapata with his horse, which is a part of a mural that I did at Cuernavaca. Then they did a reproduction for the Museum of Modern Art in New York City also, which is what you see here. Right? At this time, there's enough time to take questions from the audience. Anything that I can answer with children around, I will gladly respond to. Si, Senora.
You said you could only plaster as much of the wall as you could paint in a day. How big an area was that?
Well, for me, I work very quickly. So if I were to call it in square feet, probably 12 square feet a day. But, you know, the way we do it is to take this section like a jigsaw puzzle. One has to blend into the other. And sometimes the colors don't match next to each other. If the formula and the temperature and the humidity are different, it can throw you off. So it can be very difficult. You have to learn to do this. What you do is what is called a cartoon. That is, you draw an outline of what it is you're going to transfer to the wall on a sheet of paper. And it's like a giant piece of jigsaw puzzle. And then with this outline drawing, you take a tool that perforates the little dots on the line. And then you tape it to the wall where the wet plaster is. By the way, there's 3 layers of plaster. This is the top layer, which has marble dust and lime and other things in it. And you take chalk and you dust, and it creates a dotted outline of where it is you're going to paint. So the process is very interesting and very time-consuming. And I think it takes a special kind of person to not only want to do this, but who's capable of doing this. I fell off the scaffold more than once. One time I fell off the scaffold, I came home, and it was when I was married to Lupe. And she was angry with me about something. Well, I don't know, it could be almost anything. But they literally carried me into the room on a stretcher because I had fallen off the scaffold. And she was so angry, she said, just put him over in the corner. I'll get to him later when I finish eating. Well, she did eventually, and she apologized, but at the time she was angry. Si, Senor.
Maybe I missed it. Can you describe how you remove these paintings from the wall?
Well, the wall itself is removed.
Something like a doors behind it?
Well, they have to put some kind of backing. I'm not an architect to know this, but there has to be a back support behind the wall itself. But the whole wall is taken out. So you're literally removing the wall. That painting I did of the Alameda Park, they built a special building to house it. You can see it today in Mexico City because the hotel was torn down. It's over 30 feet long and 16 feet high, and it weighs, I think, 15 tons. It's very heavy. So this kind of art is not something you do at home at night in your kitchen, you know.
Did you do any work in the post office of New York?
I never did any post offices, but you know, mural painting in Mexico became such an important part of what we call now the Renaissance of Mexico, that many Americans came to Mexico to learn, to study with us. We, of course, came to this country and helped many Americans to do the same thing we were doing. And during the Depression, your president, Roosevelt, commissioned American artists to do murals in post offices. So there you'll see many post office murals. And this was all because of what was going on south of the border, what we were doing, and some of the things we were doing up here too, to your walls. See? It's a water-based, it's basically a tempera paint. Tempera paint, and the wall surface has lime, 1 part, and 2 parts marble dust. And there's a chemical reaction, I'm no chemist, but the chemical reaction that occurs, and the paint is literally absorbed into the wet plaster like a sponge, so the colors become a part of the wall. They bond with the walls itself. And you go to Italy, you see the frescoes by Giotto that were there since the 1300s, huh? Still there, still vibrant. So it lasts. Any other questions for me? Si, senor.
What became of your children?
Well, 2 of my daughters became painters as well, and one became an actress. My daughter Ruth became an actress, so I'm very proud of her. Other questions for me? Well, See,
Well, this is the kind of question people seem to like to ask, but what was your favorite work on yours?
what's my favorite work? You know, this is like a man with many children saying, who's your favorite child? It's the same problem. It's like, the best answer I can give to you, if I were around to say this, my next painting would be my favorite. Don't look behind you. That's history. Enjoy what you have done, be proud of what you have done, but always look to the future. So to me, my next painting is my best painting. And if it's not, that's okay, I'll move on and make the next one my best. Thank you very much. We have one more question.
How many hours, do you still paint and how many hours?
Just 1 second, I want to turn this fan off so I can hear you better. See?
Do you still paint, and if so, how many hours a day do you paint?
Do I still paint? Well, I don't get much time off for good behavior where I am. But when I was on this planet,
Yes.
and I was able to paint, I paint almost every day, and on a good, normal working day, 8 hours like a worker. But sometimes when you're stressed for time, or you want to complete something, or you just can't give up because things are going so well, and if you stop, you'll ruin it the next day. 12, 14 hours is not unheard of, but most of the time, 8 hours is plenty.
What was
See.
your last painting? When was your last painting?
My last painting was a self-portrait that I did. I did quite a few self-portraits, and I didn't flatter myself. Freda used to call me the little frog, because I had frog eyes. So I often did a caricature of myself with a frog. See?
Does your politics ever change?
No, it didn't change in a direct way, in an indirect way. As I told you, I was a communist, but the Mexican Communist Party kicked me out. They kicked me out because I was becoming too capitalistic by selling all those paintings to capitalists and taking commissions and money when I should have been spreading the wealth, you know. Plus, I was not exactly a Stalinist. And as you know, nothing is monolithic, including communism. You know, the great communist Leon Trotsky, we harbored him in Mexico. He came to Mexico, and we were asked to put him up in our home, which we did. Trotsky and his wife came to our home in Cuyoacan, and while he was staying with us at the Blue House, well, things got very angry between the two of us because he and Freda began having an affair. So that was one of the reasons that we separated at the time. The other reason was I was having an affair with her sister. But that is the way the things were with us. We were spreading the wealth around for everybody. But seriously, I was leaning more in the direction of Trotsky, although he didn't like my politics. He called me too much of an anarchist. And, you know, labels and names and isms begin to fly. But my reverence for the beliefs in communism, call them naive or simplistic, they were what I believed in because I had grown up in a time. I remember seeing as a young boy in Guanajuato that men were beaten up by the police on the street because they were not wearing shoes in a nice neighborhood. That was the law. If you did not wear shoes in this neighborhood, you had to be a peon. And you were in the wrong neighborhood, so we'll beat you up. Class meant everything in Mexico. It meant everything. So I learned to fight for the people who are not as privileged. And, you know, the state was very authoritarian. The church was very authoritarian. The army, of course. And many of the landowners, of course, were trying to hold on to their wealth. And when land reform was called for, there were many people who fought this. Well, that's enough politics for tonight. I want to thank all of you for coming out on a Monday night, and I hope to see all of you someday, but not here. Huh?